What is up guys, Morton here from SteamFirst.com with a review for the Desolate Hope, an RPG platformer developed by Scott Cawthon and released May 5th, 2014 on Steam for $5. I had a hard time identifying exactly what type of game the Desolate Hope is because it has elements from so many genres. There's platforming, there's turn-based RPG fights, there's scavenger elements where you need to collect things, but even though there's a lot of things to do, it doesn't feel spread too thin. But we'll get back to the gameplay. I'm far more interested in talking about the story. Everything takes place on an abandoned structure in space called the Lun Infinus. It was originally set up as a place to explore possibilities of humans living elsewhere in case the Earth ever becomes uninhabitable. There are different computers called derelicts that are each running their own simulations to try and create a plan for colonization. However, the original plan was only supposed to last 5 years, and it's been 30 years since Earth last contacted the Lun Infinus. So the simulations are getting far more complex than originally intended. Now a virus has started spreading, and it's taking more and more processing power to deal with the virus, which leaves less for the simulations. You control Coffee, the last mobile service robot, as you learn about the derelicts and the virus and try to stop it. Along the way you uncover more and more about the world, the computers, and everything else. The story gets a 5 out of 5. It truly was fantastic, and although there are minor things to complain about, it doesn't really bring it down overall. The pacing was great, the characters were unique, and the story was original. The gameplay is good too, but it can kind of be all over the place. For starters, as I said, you play as Coffee, which is literally a coffee pot with a CPU that can move around, so the main gameplay is exploring the Lun Infinus, looking for the virus. Each of the derelicts have their own area, so you can explore each one, and they're actually really different, from the enemies you fight to their layouts. They're all very unique. During this, it's all platforming and fighting off enemies in a way that reminds me somewhat of Mega Man. There's also money you collect along the way that gives you the ability to buy upgrades for the derelicts. There's a day-night cycle though, and you can only look for the virus during the day. At night, you're walking around outside looking for items. The items are given to the derelicts to level them up, more on that in a minute, but it's really boring to be honest. The items are all found in a straight line, so you just go outside and walk until you see a white sparkle on the ground, then you pick it up. You can only carry 2 items at a time, so you'll need to go back and give them to the derelicts, then you just go back outside and continue walking. And it's just a lot of back and forth. And it's necessary to do it, but it's really not very engaging or difficult in any way. The point of leveling up the derelicts is for the last part of the gameplay, which is actually fighting the virus itself. This happens in somewhat turn-based RPG fights involving the derelicts. Basically, each one has its own unique skills, and you need to use them to fight against the virus. They have charge times on their abilities, and there's a fair deal of strategy involved in knowing what skills to use when. On top of that, it's very fast-paced, and if you make decisions too slowly, it'll put you really far behind and be hard for you to win. Overall, the gameplay is really fun during the day when you're exploring, and it's fun during the fights too. The only part that gets monotonous and boring is the nighttime phases where all you can do is pick up items. The other problem is that there's a lot left unexplained. Most of the time you have no real idea what to do, and it's just walking around hoping you'll find the right spot. For example, early on I was walking around and told I needed a jetpack to proceed further, but there was no way of knowing where to find the jetpack. And then once I figured that out, got the jetpack and moved forward, all I found there was a fight I had no chance of winning at that point. So I had to turn around anyway and go somewhere else. The gameplay gets a 4 out of 5. It's really fun in the day phase when you're making progress, and the fights are a lot of fun too, but there's a lot of time spent not knowing where to go, or in the night phase just walking back and forth. Graphically, the game is pretty good. The different areas are all varied, and some are darker while others are more vibrant, and it works really well. The backgrounds are also really well done. In particular, when you're outside at nighttime, the moon moves up in the sky and it looks fantastic. But the biggest part of the visuals is the fights against the virus. I'm not even joking when I say that these fights must have caused seizures. There's a ton of lights flashing. Sometimes the screen fades to black and white and just pulses, and it's completely insane. It works really well with all the hectic fights, but it's jarring and crazy to look at. The graphics get a 4.5 out of 5. All the areas were well done, and I liked how the colors worked during the fights, but sometimes the flashing got way too out of hand to the point where you can't even tell what's happening. The soundtrack and all the sound effects are amazing throughout the entire game. Each zone has its own music, and they're all really well done. The music in fights is fantastic as well and adds a lot to the game. The sound effects for the jetpack or shooting while in the platforming sections are good as well, and it's hard to find anything to really complain about as far as the audio goes. Sound gets a 5 out of 5. They did a really fantastic job with it. As for replayability, there's not a huge amount because everything is basically going to be the same and there aren't any achievements to go for. The only thing you could do to change it up would be to get different upgrades, which would change things a little bit, but it wouldn't be very different at all. The gameplay is fun and unique, but there's no reason to ever play it again unless you just really liked it. Replayability gets a 1.5 out of 5. There's definitely things that could have been added, achievements, or even a new game plus mode to give more replayability, but for some reason those things don't exist. Overall, The Desolate Hope is a very fun game that manages to merge multiple different genres without feeling overwhelming or confusing. But there are definitely some problems with the game. In particular, there's a lot of waiting around, especially at night where you can't do anything productive, but the audio and visuals are both excellent, and the gameplay is fun when you're platforming and exploring, and especially in the boss fights with the virus. Overall, the Desolate Hope gets a 4 out of 5, and with a length of around 8 to 10 hours for $5, it's a great value.